All right. Hi. So I'm Nickey Skarstad. I'm going to talk today a little bit about finding product market fit. Before I jump in, what I want to do is just really quickly introduce myself. I, as Tim said, have worked with Tim. So I started my career as a product manager at Etsy in 2010. And this was Etsy early days, really, when it was, I think I was the 96th employee. I left when I think there was over 1,100 people, and started actually on their community team and became an accidental expert on the seller experience and how sellers were actually using essentially using the experience to sell and to make money and to run their small businesses. And through that process, kind of started getting pulled into product meetings, some of Tim's meetings actually. And over time, just got pulled onto the product team where I became a PM and worked my way up to director of product. So when I left Etsy in 2017, I think it was 2017. Time is an illusion these days. I was director of product and I worked on the seller experience. And I left Etsy to go to Airbnb, where I was a product lead for Airbnb experiences. And for those of you that don't know what that product is, it's relatively new. It launched in 2016. And it's essentially Airbnb's things to do while you're traveling experience, where you can kind of go out into the world, or you used to be able to go out into the world, and you'd be able to take an experience and meet hosts and do all sorts of fun stuff like that. So I worked actually on that product experience, which was really awesome, and helped them really figure out how to grow it, how to scale it, and how to get product market fit. And so through that process, sort of became a little, I hate to say obsessed, because that's the wrong way to describe it, but really started to understand and learn about how you can drive product market fit as a product manager, and sort of what are the things that you should be looking for and care about if you are actually trying to drive these things. So, and now I'm VP of product at The Wing, where I am essentially helping women connect with other women and get ahead. And we're also going through this exercise right now of finding product market fit. So it's been really interesting to do this again. So I'm going to share a little bit about some of these experiences, but first kind of want to address the proverbial elephant in the room, which is this weird life situation that we've all found ourselves in. So I am in New York City. Just actually heard at 7 o'clock every day, they're doing clap for the people on the front lines, which has been really special. I just heard that, but it's been really intense. I've actually also been working from home with my 3 children, or 2 children and a dog, which is my 3rd child. And so if a child bursts through this door over my shoulder at any point, I'm just going to apologize in advance, because that probably will happen. And so I think that we're in this interesting moment where, product market fit might be relevant to some folks that are working in product, but because the world's just shifted pretty aggressively, I think it actually matters more than ever. And PMs who maybe were sitting in really cushy roles where they didn't necessarily have to rediscover how to drive growth, or growth was just happening, have to really think and essentially go back to the basics and really figure out how to drive growth again. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to just talk about sort of what product market fit is, how you can find it. And then I'm just going to share some examples of some really interesting company pivots and work that different companies are doing right now, because I think there's so much pivoting happening out there that there's so much to learn from the experience and how companies are adapting. So that's what I'm going to spend my time talking about. So before we get into any of that fun stuff, I think sort of focusing on the current moment is just why do we care about this and what is it? So from a product market fit standpoint, product market fit really is effectively connecting a market with a product, having a really good product that people know how to use, and a market that it really needs and is hungry for that product. So I found this really interesting explanation of World 1.0 and World 2.0, which is very dramatic, but I kind of like it, about essentially how the world has changed recently. And I think that this is really interesting because, again, that this plays into the fact that the world has changed and we're all sort of dealing with this new landscape that we have to figure out how to deal with. So again, I think it's very much impacting you probably personally, but most likely professionally too. We're all kind of going through this together and have to figure out what to do. So some things that stood out to me here, we're seeing real changes in consumer behavior, how people use products, how they navigate the change around them, how they live, how they are making money, really like sort of every vector for how people are living their lives has changed. So as a product person, really getting into the weeds on those changes and understanding how you can actually help people and solve their problems in new ways is more important now than ever. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you may or may not have seen in your Psychology 101 class that you took in university. This is, I think, is really relevant to this moment, because what this pyramid is essentially, it's just human needs, and the most basic human needs sit at the bottom of the pyramid. And I think what we're seeing in this World 2.0 moment is a lot of people's products that like were addressing people's self-fulfillment needs or psychological needs really have become less relevant as people have focused on their basic needs again. And so I think some of the companies that are really thriving and are doing well are the ones that are very much like sitting at the bottom of the pyramid. And so I think this is a good frame to think about some of the things that you're working on, especially from like a psychological safety standpoint, things like that, how you can build things and solve problems that are really going to sit at the base of this pyramid and hopefully help people rebuild things up as the world eventually, hopefully, starts to get back to normal. So I was poking around on the internet, and I looked at it, just a lot of companies that have been pretty severely impacted by what's been happening. This graph is from OpenTable. They essentially published a like before this pandemic situation and after. And what you see here is literally a year-over-year growth look at how in-person dining and reservations is trending. It's literally at a negative 100%. And so I think a lot of companies that had very cushy product market fit or like are very long tenured products like OpenTable have really like lost their footing really quickly. And I think that this is something to keep an eye on, because if like where people might have been really comfortable in what they had built before, again, the ground has shifted a little bit and they have to really take a step back and think about getting product market fit again. And so I put a screenshot of like Blue Apron's stock price here, because it's been interesting to watch some of the companies that maybe weren't in the limelight before, have gotten a new, sort of like a new consumer focus, and their businesses actually like are doing great. And that obviously the reverse has happened to companies like OpenTable. And so I think like just being able to kind of compare and contrast, and it'll be interesting to see what OpenTable tries to do, if anything. I could see them pivoting to like find a virtual dining buddy or something along those lines. I totally just made that up. It's probably a bad idea. But really interesting, again, to watch all of these companies and how they're adapting to this situation. So also just been reading the media a lot and kind of looking at what's happening across the different product experiences. So this is from the New York Times. I think it was published last week. Don't quote me on that. Where it's just basically like huge shifts in how people are using technology are happening as well. So people are using websites more, are on their phones less. And you can imagine some of the use cases that drive phone use are down, like you're on your commute, or you're out in running errands, whatever. And so people are more attached to their desktop computers. It's really interesting. And you're seeing some of these very important businesses see changes and patterns that they're going to have to adapt to. And I think like it's interesting too with like video usage and things like that, just people shifting away from what they were doing before. Also, asynchronous communication used to be kind of the way people would talk to each other on places like Facebook. And now I think people are craving more synchronous communication because they have more time on their hands. I still swear that like it's not okay to FaceTime me without telling me first. This is my mom's new thing. Like, you still need to tell me you're going to FaceTime me, even if we're in this global pandemic situation. So, cool. And so this is, again, just look at like video chat, how it's growing. And I think we'll talk about sort of like the product market fit hockey stick graph in a bit, but it's interesting to watch if you sort of see the growth of these, essentially these apps and these products really spike after COVID came to the US. And you can just kind of understand why, right? House Party is I think it's like a virtual game. It's like a video chat app where you can do like quizzes and like it's very social. So that has spiked as people have used it. And then Nextdoor, everyone's very familiar with that product, but that's essentially like what's going on in your neighborhood. So that's a focus on local. And it's the same with Google Duo. So people just like logging in and using that experience. So I think these are classic examples of like what product market fit looks like on a graph, which is interesting to see. Cool. So I think that the high level takeaways here that generally, like if you don't act quickly and don't be very strategic about what you're doing during this time, there's a chance that your product might never recover. This is very like doomsday, so I don't mean to I'm gonna bring this back and make it lighter later, I promise. But it's important that, you know, depending on the signals that you're getting, that people are taking this seriously, because it is very much going to impact your product. And how you respond to it actually matters a great deal to your customers and to the trust and the loyalty that you build with them. There is this sort of famous Sequoia Capital investor deck that they published during the 2008 economic downturn, or our most recent recession, essentially, that really gets into the weeds on how they were advising their founders about how to handle that recession. And the high level takeaway was like RIP fun, right? Like all of a sudden, all of that money that you used to have access to as a product person or somebody building an app or a founder is gonna go away for a while. So here's how you need to like sort of lock down the hatches and deal with your business in this short-term period. And you can just Google this. I highly recommend to take a look at it. It's really interesting because a lot of the themes in here, I'll talk about one in a bit, but really like rings true in today's environment. And the good times will be back, but it's important to like really think about, you know, how your product is going to weather what's happening right now in the world. And I liked this sort of cheesy Darwin quote, but essentially like it talks about change and how it's not necessarily the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptable to change who thrive. And I think that's what happened during the 2008 economic downturn. And I think you will see the same thing happening now with how people are essentially able to respond and to bounce back. And then finally, again, just if you are able to handle this well, if you can build trust with your users, your members, your subscribers on the other side, I personally think that companies potentially are going to come out of this weaker, or they're going to come out of this stronger. And the way that you respond and the way that you build trust again with your consumers is going to make all of the difference. So really thinking about how you're talking to your user and the products that you're building that are helping to solve their problems is great. And I think we'll talk about some brands that are doing some of these things in a bit, but you can really start to see who's like emerging as a brand by giving back potentially, and by building trust with their user. So it's again, I think as a product person, you know, I'm sort of obsessed with like what's happening in the world. And I think this is such an interesting moment to be alive. Just to watch what happens. And there's so much to be learned from how people are responding. Cool. So again, product market fit, what does this mean? I think this is one of those like sort of buzzy, it's like a Silicon Valley, like product market fit, super buzzy phrase. And it's really like what it is. It's very simple if you boil it down. It's essentially like, it means you have an awesome product and that product satisfies a market need. This chart on the right comes from this infographic of this company that essentially sent out surveys to, it was like a couple hundred startups that failed, and they asked them why they failed. And if you look at this list, it's interesting because it's essentially like number one. You know, if you thought about it, you would imagine it'd be something like, you know, they had a crappy product, or I didn't like using it, or whatever. And it's really just like there's no market needs, just people don't need it, right? So essentially having that market that's ready for your product is actually incredibly important and relevant. And so you need to make sure that you're going into a market, or the market is ready for your product. And if not, you need to pivot to a new market, or you need to change your product so it does meet that market need. And if you look here too, even like poor product is like down that list, which I find very fascinating. I think if there is a very clear market need, people will actually put up with relatively non-usable, not great products because they just need something so bad. I think a lot of the early success, I actually think like Airbnb is a good example of this, where it took them a while to really figure out how to actually offer their product in a way that was sticky. But it had such clear market fit, and there was such a clear market for what they were offering that eventually they found it. And when they found it, it was just, up and to the right for their business. And so I think this, again, as people who are building products, really important to think about how that market, what the market needs are, what your consumer needs are, and then how you build that thing in a way that's actually going to serve those needs of those consumers. So that's what product market fit is. And how do you know you have it? So this is, I think, there's many different ways to measure this. We'll talk about how to measure it in a second. But I think there's like all sorts of like really simple rubrics you can use to understand if you have product market fit. I think it seems like a kind of scary concept and people don't necessarily understand it, but really it's these simple things like, are people paying you? How much are they paying you? Will they pay you a lot for what you're offering them? Are they telling their friends? Is there some sort of organic referral loop? And there's lots of different ways as a product person that you can measure this, but really at the end of the day, if they're telling people about it, it's a great signal that you are actually delivering some value to people, right? I was thinking about this as I was writing this last night, and I was like, what is the last product that I actually like referred to a friend? And because of the situation, it was actually Zoom, which we're using right now. And with some of my friends in the Midwest from high school, we had like a wine night. Actually, I'm seeing my friends from high school more during this pandemic than I was before, which is very strange, but I'll take it. And was talking all about Zoom and how much I liked it and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I would never have told anyone about Zoom like 3 weeks ago. Like, what? And I was like raving about it. So we're in a strange time. So do they tell their friends? And then do they keep using your product on a continuous basis? So how often are they actually using the thing that you've built? We'll talk about how you can measure some of these things later, but this is important because if it's something that is sticky, that they're coming back to, that they do have a need for, and that they're using again and again, and that's gonna help you with all sorts of things like their LTV. It's gonna probably increase the amount of times they refer you, they talk about it, et cetera, just because they're using the thing often. I think some of like the most sticky products, things like Facebook, and like social experiences where they get you kind of back and they use it and kind of get you addicted, say what you will about that, are the ones that typically like become heavily ingrained because so many people are using it. And then, I was joking here, but would they cry if you folded? I think this is an interesting one, which is basically like, are they bummed if you go out of business? You can actually measure this and ask people about this. Like what happens if we took it away or if we changed this in some way, how would you feel? And if people are bummed that you're gonna go away, I think that it's a good signal. It doesn't necessarily mean you have product market fit, but it's one of many different ways where you kind of understand like what you're, essentially like how valuable you are to your member or your consumer. And is your CAC lower than that customer's lifetime value? So if you are paying for customers, you have to be very careful and thoughtful about how much money you're spending to bring people to your experience. A lot of the, I think, really sticky experiences that drive really good word of mouth and virality are the ones often where they're not really paying any money for their users. As businesses get bigger, as you kind of need to go into new markets, as you need to scale, you often start paying to bring those members to you or to those users to your site. And you just need to make sure that, obviously over time that they are spending more with you or they are worth more to you than you are paying to acquire them. This is an interesting one where this seems so obvious where it's like, duh, obviously, right? Like you can't lose a ton of money with every customer, otherwise your business is gonna not make any money. But I think some of the companies that you're seeing get in trouble right now are the ones that were just buying their growth, aggressively buying their growth. And then in a world where they don't have any money or they have no funding, or people have like changed their behavior patterns and they don't have that money to reinvest in their growth loop, those companies right now are hurting. And so just being really thoughtful about every dollar that you're spending to bring users to your site is just a really great, again, a great measure of like, do or do I not have product market fit? Do they wear your swag? This one's cheeseball, but I spent a couple of years in San Francisco, and this was always like a measure of like, do you want to wear that company's swag? I work at the Wing, and we actually have so many people who want to wear our merchandise. We actually sell merchandise, and it's like a relatively profitable endeavor for us, which I find very cool. We also have to just have cool merch generally, but I think this is a fun one. But people will like pay you to wear your brand if you have a cool brand, and if your product is actually doing something for them. So this might be an interesting A/B test. You should tweet me if you end up running this, but like if you can sell some swag and some people are out there walking around with your name on their t-shirt, it's not bad for the business for sure. And so do they get mad if you change your product? This is something back in my Etsy days, we used to deal with this a lot. I'm sure Tim is still dealing with this, LOL Tim. Is that if customers are just super mad if you have like changed a workflow or changed your product or are so passionate about something that they will send you really angry emails about those changes that you're making. I think that's often a good sign. You have to be careful as the person building the product that you're not abusing that or changing things too often or changing things without reason. But usually it's just a healthy signal that like people are using this enough where they are mad when I changed it on them and I didn't necessarily give them enough notice. Etsy spent a lot of time in the early days like managing seller change aversion because they were so steeped in their workflows and so obsessed with the way that things were that they would get like really salty when we changed things. And I always thought that like the day that they stop caring when we make a change is the day that something is wrong with our business. So I'm not saying that you should piss people off, but if you are pissing people off because you're changing things, they actually care. So with great power comes great responsibility. In the words of Spider-Man's uncle. Cool. Do they put up with your bugs and crappy product decisions? This is another good one. I think a lot of startups, especially like early product, often is like ripe with bugs or user experience hasn't quite figured out, design isn't great, things like that. But people will still use it and they will kind of put up with your bad product decisions if you have product market fit. And again, this is a good example of like, you should not abuse this. Like obviously your job as a product person is to make the most delightful experience that solves everyone's problems. But if they are putting up with your issues and they're telling you about where your product doesn't fulfill their needs, that's a great signal that people are engaged, they're paying attention, and they care enough to pester you to fix those things. Do they respond to your surveys even if you don't pay them? Survey response rate is like a very simple way to understand do people care, right? If no one responds to your survey, they're not opening your emails, they're not engaging with you at all, obviously that's a problem. But even if you have some usage on your site and no one cares enough to give you feedback or to respond to your research, you should take a long, hard look in the mirror and figure out how to either improve those member or user relationships or just ask yourself, do I have product market fit? Because people clearly don't care. And then finally, do they continue to support you even during the dark times? I've been jokingly, I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd, and there's a scene from one of the movies where I forget who says it, but he's like, these are dark times. I keep thinking about that during this weird pandemic situation. But do your users support you? Are they still using you? Especially if you have like a subscription service or something like that where people are expected to pay for you, if you're a brand that is selling any type of product right now. I think if people are paying you, and even if your growth has dropped, but you still have like a loyal cohort of users, that is an incredibly good signal that you're still in an okay place. And I'm curious, I think like, in 2 years from now, we're gonna look back on the situation and have so much more data about what happened to technology and to consumer businesses and things like that. But I do think we're starting to see those signals come out now. And my hunch is that the companies that are able to maintain like core retention of like important users are the ones that on the other side will grow again. And again, I think some of this boils down to you treating your users really well, making sure to respond to their problems and being quick thinking on your feet and being able to react to what's happening in the world today. So these are just this is like the Nickey Skarstad like hot take on how you know if you have product market fit. And I'm sure there's so many more of these things, but I think these are just some of like the really easy things that you can look at to see if you are on the right track. Cool. So how do you measure this? So again, there's so many metrics that you can look at. I think you can actually put a metric behind every single one of the last 10 things that I just showed you. But some of the things that I think stand out and are things to watch are referral rate, word of mouth rates. And so what percentage of your acquisition is coming from organic / word of mouth? And finding ways to measure that is really helpful. We added a question in our application process to be a member at the Wing recently, just to understand like how many of our members are actually coming from a referral. We don't have like a classic referral program. And we were actually shocked at how many people were being referred. We thought it was going to be high, but not like as high as it was. And so this is an important thing for you to know and for you to measure. And I think you can actually measure it. We literally asked people in the application, like, are you referred? It was like the most simple thing ever. And it was just a really good thing for us to know. And then finally, like your cost of acquired customer should be below your lifetime value. And this one, again, I think is pretty obvious, basic, like business, but just making sure that you are very thoughtful about paying for users and what that means when you do pay for them, and that it nets out in that they're paying more than you are paying for them. DAU over MAU. So this is definitely like a more social engagement metric, but what this is DAU is daily active users over monthly active users. And so what this is looking at is the percentage of your users that would use you each month. How many of them are coming back and using you every day? And this is important because it's essentially like a really clear stickiness metric. And again, if you were building something that is like more engagement social bent, this is an important one because it's going to really help you understand like what's going on. And that 30% benchmark is healthy. 50% is like best in class. I think Facebook is at 50%, or it was, I have no idea now, but 30% is like a good, like we're on the right track. And then D7 and D30. So what these are is DAU, daily active users, 7 days after somebody onboards, daily active users, 30 days after somebody onboards. And so again, these are essentially engagement metrics that are telling you like, are people sticking around? You should obviously be measuring retention at the highest level anyway, but this helps you understand really clearly, like, do we have a problem getting people to use the thing and to stay at least a month? This is especially important if you have some sort of subscription business, because you're going to see how many people are actually going to churn and start to drop off. And in terms of like numbers that are healthy for these things, I think it really depends. I didn't put numbers behind all of these because it depends on the business that you're running. So if you have like an expensive SaaS product that you're charging a monthly fee for, you might actually like be able to have lower numbers if people use the experience less, but they're paying you. Maybe that one time that they use your product creates enough value for them. But you know, if that's not the case, then you need them to come back and use it more. Also, if you're running some sort of like advertising business, like a Facebook, for example, you want people to be using it every day because then they're going to click on ads, they're going to buy stuff, and it's going to help your bottom line. So it really depends on the business, but I think these are some of the very like high level things that you can look at. And then there's the power user curve smile. It looks like a smile, which makes me smile. I took this screenshot from Andrew Chen, who is a prolific writer about just kind of like growth hacking. I think he used to work for Uber. He has an amazing blog. If you don't read it, sign up for his newsletter. It's one of my favorites out there. And what this graph is showing you is of your users who are around for 30 days, how many of them essentially like are actually active daily, right? And so what you see here, a healthy power user curve smile, or whatever you want to call it, it means it literally looks like a smile because you have people that on the sad end, so they only are around for 1 day, versus the people who actually use you every day of the month, and it's still high at the end. So looking at this and just starting to understand, are people sticking around? What does that look like? What percentage of folks are actually like mapping out over the course of a month? Again, I think it depends what success looks like here, depending on what your product is and how you're charging, how you're monetizing, et cetera. But it's another good engagement signal. And then other monetization signals, I think, again, going back to my earlier point, if you have an expensive product and you really only need people to use that thing one time, you know, some SaaS products are like you sign up for a year-long contract. You might care less about like people using it every day, but you need to watch like how many people are retaining, what does churn look like, and is there a sweet spot about how many times somebody uses your thing each month, or what value they're extracting, to help you understand how you're monetizing and what that's going to look like. So I think these are some of the obvious ones. Again, I think you can literally go back to the slide before and put a metric on each of those things, like survey results, et cetera. But I think these are some of the clear ones that are going to really like tell you how you're doing. Cool. All right, so how do you find product market fit? So how do you know if you have it, and how do you take today's constraints into consideration? So I'm not a data scientist, so forgive my terrible graphs here. But there's this like famous hockey stick graph, right? Which is like product market fit is where, you know, you're trying things at the bottom of this graph and it's not really working and it doesn't start to grow. And then one day it starts to grow. And a lot of graphs that are consistent, like Airbnb's followed this exact same thing. It's very much, you can see the struggle at the bottom of people trying to figure it out, and then they actually figure it out. And then it just starts to grow crazy. And I think that like what's happening during this pandemic situation is that you might see things like this if this is your business, where you had it was growing, and then, oh shit, there's a global pandemic and it starts to fall off. And my takeaway here is that I'm guessing a lot of people are actually seeing graphs like these that some of them might even be like to the ground, like an open table situation. Hopefully that's not you. Although it's okay if it is, I feel for you. But I think the tactics that you used in the beginning that really drove effectively your ability to drive product market fit, they might not be the same tactics that you're going to have to use to actually like bring it back again. And I think this is important because everyone has like a growth tool belt that they wear, right, when they're trying to grow their product. And I think we're just in these wild times where a lot of things have changed. You don't necessarily know what has happened, and you got to be really agile on your feet to make sure you can stick around. And I also I put this here again, I already touched on this, but I think these graphs of these Nextdoor, Google, and House Party are really interesting because you can actually see them getting product market fit through this situation. So it's just fascinating to watch what's happening to businesses. Cool, and so this came from this Sequoia Capital's RIP Good Times deck, which again, I love. But this is essentially like how you set yourself on the path to get product market fit. And there's a couple things here, right? Where you need to figure out, making sure that you have the right product, testing and understanding customers' abilities to pay during the dark times, understanding what your competitors are doing and how they're actually like fighting you in new ways during this situation, and really looking through all of these things. And their takeaway here is that you should be preserving capital rather than grow. But I think this it trickles back to if you have product market fit and what you need to do to be able to get it. And finally, so how do you set your organization or your team up to start to find it? So these are some of the things I think that like really stood out to me and are relevant here, but doing things like designing your organization and your team to be really malleable. I think the more quick on your feet your whole organization can move, so you can pivot and try new things, the more successful you're going to be during this situation. Train your teams to work in a way that's agile. Ideally, you would have already been working this way and you wouldn't need to retrain a whole company or a team. But really focusing on how you work and how you can move quickly right now is going to make sure you're successful. And again, that there's that like lean startup way of testing things, which is just you want to try some stuff, try really scrappy tests where you don't have to invest a lot, see what happens. If you fail, try it again, and recalibrate repeatedly until you see a little bit of stickiness and traction. Also, I said ditch quarterly roadmaps and planning. This might be harder for like bigger companies, but you know, if you're in a startup or a smaller company, I think like planning for a quarter right now when you have no idea what the future looks like is a bit of a fool's errand. Obviously, you should have a longer term vision for sure, but really try to make sure that you're looking and reflecting on the work that you have in front of you for the next couple of weeks all the time, because it's going to be changing depending on the world, as to how the world is changing. Hire people who have a growth mindset. You know, I think people who can work in these ways that are comfortable with the squishiness are often really good people to have on your team. At Airbnb, they had different types of product managers depending on if you're a platform PM, this is what your job is. They had like a startup PM, which was the experiences team. And I found that really interesting because I think the type of people who thrived in that startup environment, even within a big company like Airbnb, were very different from the people who thrived on a platform team or on sort of like a growing the traditional business team. So being thoughtful about like, if you're able to hire right now and expand your team, really making sure you're thinking who is going to be on board and can they work in a way that's agile? Can they not get freaked out when the world explodes around them? It's just going to help you move quickly. Setting clear strategic direction that creates focus. I think extreme focus is important right now. It'd be really easy to just get like whirlwind by all of the different options you have in front of you, and really you should just figure out what you're doing, test it, try something else, etc., and move really quickly that way, so you don't waste time. So I think the people who are going to sit on their hands and not make changes are the ones that potentially might come out of this on the other side. in a good place. And understanding the new market as much as you can, doing research, understanding your customer and her needs, over delivering in the places where you think it's going to add the most value. And then finally, like, create a must-have product, no big deal. Like, this is so easy, but really, like, I think it'll be interesting to see if there's any new launches or what new sticky things happen during this time, because so much is unknown. So I'm cruising through this part because I want to get to the fun stuff, which is companies and what they're doing. And this is something I was just listening to Reid Hoffman's Masters of Scale podcast the other day, and Brian Chesky was on talking about what Airbnb is doing. And I thought this quote was good, which is essentially just like how he's thinking about how his company is responding. And it's like, do more than people expect, be remembered for how you conduct yourselves, be nimble, pivot to where you think the world is going. If we leave you with anything today, I think that's like a great way to think about it. Pivot, try to get ahead of this situation as much as you can, invest in your product, over deliver where it's relevant, and you will be okay. So cool. So what are companies doing right now? So I think this has been, for me at least, what's been really interesting to watch, how very profitable, huge institutions are crumbling, what they're doing to fix it. Little scrappy startups that, don't have a ton of overhead and can move really quickly, what they're doing. So some of the things, these are just like a lot of the brands that I follow. And I'm curious if you've seen anything else, share it in the chat, because I think it's just such an interesting time to watch what people are doing. But so first is The Wing. So I'm the VP of product at The Wing. The Wing is essentially what we are co-working spaces for women. We had been working on digital technology and starting to figure out how to bring some of the magic that happens in our physical spaces digitally, much like about a year ago when I started, and had made progress, thankfully, because what had happened during this pandemic is we had to close all of our spaces really quickly, almost overnight. We were able to really quickly pivot to digital and use our digital technology to help us add value to our members in the meantime. And so this is what we're working on now, which is taking all of our programming digital, and we're working on building functionality that helps bring people together and connect our members outside of physical spaces. So things like groups and job boards and all of the things that were kind of happening tactically are now happening in the app. And we've actually been able to grow what people are doing in the app post closing our spaces, which to me tells us that we're on the right track from a digital perspective. So it's been really interesting to like refocus the team on like, all right, we don't have to support physical spaces now. What can we do digitally? So that's my own personal experience. And then ClassPass is an interesting one. So I've been a long time ClassPass user. I love this site. I love this product. All of a sudden, what you're seeing here is growth index against the same day in March versus February. And you'll see that like literally that red negative 100%, no one is using the product. And so they quickly pivoted. Now they're doing online and on-demand workouts from all those instructors. It's almost like a workout marketplace, which I think is really cool and potentially like could be long lasting for them after this. Peloton's another good one. I'm actually sitting right next to my Peloton. I'm a huge user of their product. I love it. But they're trying a lot of like free, essentially like use our digital experience, even if you don't have one of our bikes, for free during this time, because they're just trying to like grab users. And I'm guessing they will monetize those users later, which I think is a great acquisition strategy. Airbnb, 40% drop in bookings. My hunch is it's actually probably more than that. They delayed their IPO, and they have been pivoting in real time, which has been cool to see because they are a huge company. So I imagine these pivots are not easy to pull off in a short amount of time. So what they are doing is they launched online experiences. So all of those hosts that were leading those IRL experiences are now, maybe not all of them, but some of them are online. So you can like tune in from New York and watch and make pasta with some folks in Italy. So just like a fun thing that really only Airbnb could deliver on. They also pivoted to monthly stays, I'm guessing to capitalize on the people like myself who are in New York, who was like, should I be in Cleveland or somewhere else? And then frontline stays. So this is their give back, where they are, and they're heavily promoting this on Instagram because I think it's really good for their brand, which is just they're putting up first responders and healthcare staff in Airbnbs near the places where they are working, so they don't have to go home to their families and potentially get their families sick. So just a great example of like how they can do some really good stuff, give back, problem solve, and then just hope that their physical travel business comes back when this is all said and done at the end. Sorry, I'm cruising through this. I want to make sure we have time for questions. Glossier, this is a makeup brand that I love. They have physical locations and stores. They closed all their stores. They're pivoting to essentially doing like a video consultancy for makeup. So if you have questions on their products, you can actually like ring one of their agents and it's on video and they will tell you how to put makeup on, they will teach you things and they will sell products to you. And they did this like really quickly, which is cool. Etsy is a good one. So Etsy has, you know, an army literally of people who can essentially like make stuff on demand. It's like literally hometown manufacturing. And they ask their community to make masks and have seen a ton of sellers step up to the challenge. And I think have driven a lot of buyer growth, which is really great for them. Also, just I put a picture of their stock price here because I think this is an interesting business. They have like a very interesting recession-proof business because they can mobilize local manufacturing. So this is definitely one to watch. I can see them doing some cool other stuff. Rent the Runway is another good example. They closed all their stores. They're testing a bunch of new pricing models, and they're actually letting you keep their product at home for the entirety of the crisis. Because they didn't want people to be shipping stuff, but they're charging you for it. And so they're making money on it. It's very smart. And also a good idea because there's definitely been times where I'm like, I don't want to return this, but I don't want to have to pay you a lot of money to buy it. So you can tell they're just like very iterate, like really quickly trying a bunch of different things. Let's see. And then there's other brands who like haven't done much and I'm actually really curious to see what they're gonna do. So Away is an interesting example. This was from their founders published this blog post about like 90% of their sales are gone. Away is the suitcase travel brand. And you know, I couldn't think of anything obvious that they could be doing right now, but they literally are doing nothing. So I'm curious to see if they've got something up their sleeve or what they're going to do and how they would essentially reboot those sales after this whole situation comes back to normal. Another one that was interesting was that Spotify streaming is down. So a lot of the use cases where people use a product like Spotify, like on your commute, when you're driving, whatever, you know, you're in your home. And so you're consuming other types of media potentially off your phone. So will be interesting to hear too, to see what's going to happen and how they bring music streaming back, because that's probably pretty core to their business. And I think that might have been it. Cool. So we have 9 minutes for questions. So Tim, I'm going to kick it back over to you and can jump in.
Hi, Nickey.
Hi.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. So many great examples. So folks, if you have any questions for Nickey, throw them in the Q&A section down below and we will, well, I won't, Nickey will, try to answer them as best she can.
Cool.
So, Nickey, there's a couple in there. I'll let you cherry pick. And it may be just worth repeating the question so that the folks can follow along easily at home.
Cool. So I'll just start at the top of the list here. So Terrence Finn, hi Terrence. So obviously COVID-19 has impacted those that provide workspaces, co-working spaces. I'm guessing what you mean. How do you see the Wings plans being impacted by the crisis? Great question. So we are obviously still figuring that out as we kind of figure out how long our spaces are going to be closed. It's pretty central to our current business today. And so what we've been doing is we've been essentially pivoting to digital as much as we can. And there's real things that we've been doing in our physical spaces that we actually can bring online. So all of our programming, for example, has been brought online, and we just really quickly brought that into our app and have other kind of plans up our sleeves along those lines. And so hoping that this isn't like a year-long closure, but we really do hope to bring our spaces back online when this all situation rates itself, hopefully. Next one. Cool. How did you find all the company resources to COVID-19? It'd be helpful to share some examples during our remote team meeting. So I don't know if you guys shared this deck out after Tim, but I'm a dork and I just am on Twitter a lot and I just see what people are doing and watch my brands on Instagram. And so it just was kind of like taking screenshots of things as I've been seeing interesting stuff because I knew that this was coming up. So I follow a lot of like VCs and like folks like that on Twitter, and they often are talking about what's happening in the market from a day-to-day basis. And because the situation has been so interesting, there's a lot of chatter about it.
We will be sharing a recording of this. We try to turn it around fast, so it'll probably take us a day or two, but you'll certainly all have that.
Cool. Sweet. How do you handle false positives for product market fit? This is interesting because I do think like it's really easy to think that you have product market fit and then like have your business fall over. And so I think you have to be careful with just making sure that you have your eye to the ground on all of those like engagement metrics and what people are doing and like how you're monetizing. And I think just making sure that you really understand your customer's needs at the end of the day. I think if you truly understand your customer, you can kind of wade through the noise in your metrics and the feedback that you're getting to make sure that you're on the right track. But you know, just because you see growth on a graph does not mean you have product market fit. I think it boils down to like, you know, how much of this market can I actually address with this product? And then also like, are people paying me? How does this actually impact a business? Can I build a business on this? And all of those things factor in. So I don't think there's a good, like solid answer to that question other than I think it depends. And you just have to, as a product person, especially make sure that you're trying to like wade through the noise to really understand if you do or you don't have it. Cool. Sarah asked, will the wing offer digital only memberships? So I can't say strategically, but we might be working on it. Ding. Can you see me winking? Any thoughts on product market fit for hardware or software products in the time of COVID, where pivoting typically takes longer? I was thinking about this actually as I was building this deck. I honestly don't know. I think that's a hard one because especially manufacturing has been aggressively disrupted by this. And so I think that like it probably really depends on what type of hardware that you're building. In some cases, your supply chain might be totally fine. In other cases, it might have dissolved. So there, I think like bringing manufacturing closer to home, trying to make things simpler as much as possible is probably the best way to do it. But I actually know very little about hardware, so I'm sorry I don't have a good answer to that question. Here's a fun one. Tips for someone in college trying to get into product management. So my path to product management has been very interesting because I don't have a technical background. I'm not a computer science major. I started at Etsy on their community team and I like accidentally kind of fell backwards into it. And sometimes I like to curse like the people who made me become a PM because I'm like, it's a hard job. Why did I do this? But I think generally is finding the work in a company that you're really passionate to work for and not being super precious about starting as a product manager. Because I think there's lots of different paths depending on where you work, and really making sure that you're getting experience that's like can help you when you do become a product manager in the beginning, and just kind of like knowing that's your end goal and making sure you're sort of like sailing your ship in that direction. And I do think in tech, there was when there was a lot of fast growth at companies, but oftentimes joining like a fast growth startup where you have to wear many hats is a great way to get to sort of fall into product market or product manager experience. Tim, how did you become a PM? I don't think I know the story.
Oof. I guess I had a pretty traditional path. I was a industrial design person, and that was slow and hard and expensive. And so technology seemed interesting and it kind of all worked out.
That was me. I was like, cool, I just want to work for Etsy. I wish I had a better story than that. That's not very helpful.
Yours wins. Yours is way better.
Yeah, I curse the folks who are like, good idea. Let's make Nickey be a PM because it's a hard job. Kudos to all of you out there navigating this job. I think it's not an easy one. I love it, but it's hard.
Nickey, we have time for maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up. I know there's a lot of questions in there. Sorry we won't get to them all, folks, but thank you for being super engaged with this topic.
Cool, let's find a good one. Lots of like hiring right now during weird times about whether or not to be a product manager. I actually think that like time will tell and like how this industry, technology generally is impacted. But my hunch is that, there are a lot of very well-funded startups right now that are going to continue hiring, and a lot of the big institutional organizations who have a lot of runway are still going to keep hiring. So I think from a where to work standpoint, still becoming a product manager makes sense. And hopefully the market rights itself, and in a couple of years we'll be back to normal, and there'll continue to be a ton of opportunities. I'm going to take one more, Tim, because I have 1 minute. I'm cheating, sorry. So many questions. I feel bad. Here's a good one. How do you think about balancing setting a longer-term product vision while still taking short-term action and moving quickly during these challenging times? I think that's a really good question. It would be really easy to lose sight on like what you're trying to build longer term, and I still think that's important. But I think more than ever, where maybe before you would have been able to give yourself a little bit more time to really invest in that future vision, finding ways to like lily pad your way to that future vision just to make sure that you're on the right track is going to be important. And so don't lose sight of that long vision. Like, it's still important, and it might change depending on what changes in the world. But really, again, moving quickly in that direction is just going to help you make sure you're not throwing away work and that people are going to use the thing that you're building.
Awesome. Nickey, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Folks, a couple of last things from me. One, you will get an email, hopefully in your inbox tonight or tomorrow, asking you for your feedback about the event. We know that this, as Nickey mentioned, these are crazy times. There's a lot going on. We want to try and be as useful for all of you as possible. So if you could give us some feedback on what works, what doesn't, what you want to hear about, it'll likely come in the form of asking your NPS score for the event. So please give us some feedback. We want to make this as great as possible. And secondly, we have our next speaker joining us on May 20th. And that will be Sonia Kadzierski from, believe it or not, Etsy. She is a wonderful product manager, product leader, who's going to be talking about building products in ambiguity or in ambiguous times. So hopefully should be another really great and relevant topic for what we're going through right now. So thank you all for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time during your evening or maybe afternoon, depending where you are. Stay healthy and hope to see you next month.
Bye, thank you.